Welcome back to the channel, guys. So let's talk the Warriors and why they've been losing. I know you guys have been paying attention to their games and how it's been going, and there's just been huge question marks. You know, some people are pointing at Clay, some people are pointing at Wiggins, some people are pointing at Kerr, some people are pointing at, there's a lot of different things. But we finally figured out what is missing and what's going on with the Warriors. I caught a few snippets of, I think it was 95.7 radio. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some time and we're going to go listen to what was said. They had Steve Kerr on it. And I want you guys to just take a listen, and then, I'm going to give you my reaction for what he said, and we're going to dive into this.
How close do you feel like the organization is to maybe looking at things through a new lens after all these years?
Meaning what?
Meaning the way you go about making decisions, with guys who've been around, have a resume, have been there a long time. That often seems like the fallback. When there's a decision, you guys go with the experienced guys. I wonder if you're close to potentially doing that differently at times.
When you say decisions, you're talking about personnel decisions or playing time decisions?
Yeah, mainly playing time.
Yeah, I would say, here's how I look at it. Like we know we won a championship a year and a half ago. The guys who are going to drive us winning a title or not, we know who they are, right? They're Steph, Draymond, Wiggs, Loon, Clay. Like those guys, they were the ones. Gary, huge part of that championship a year and a half ago. So we know those are the guys that have to perform at a high level if we're going to compete for a title. So, I learned this. You'll like this story. I learned this when I was a player. I was having a really bad series in the finals in '96 against Seattle. I had like 3 straight bad shooting nights, and I was distraught. My wife goes to a team dinner or a dinner with a lot of the family members, and she runs into Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner. And he says, "How's Steve doing?" And she said, "Oh, he's crushed. He just feels like he's hurting the team." And Jerry goes, "Well, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what Steve does. It matters what Michael and Scotty do. They're the ones who determine whether we win or lose." So my wife tells me this, and there's part of me that's like, "Oh, yes, I'm off the hook." And then there's the other part of me that's like, "Oh, I don't even matter. What the hell?"
Yeah. That's a great story.
And my point is, the guys who are going to determine our season are our main guys, our key guys, right? Are the guys who make all the money. They're the ones who determine winning and losing. I think our young guys are all developing, and they're developing at different stages. You try to help the development process. You fit them in here and there. But this season is about winning a championship. So that means for me, I am going to lean in to our starters. I'm going to lean into our key guys, and I'm going to give them all the space they need to find their rhythm, to establish, who they are. And once that happens, it'll make the roles much easier to play for the young guys. If you want to bail out on the old guys and plug the young guys in, then you're talking about an entirely different goal. And that's now you're talking about the future. You're not talking about winning a championship because those guys aren't ready to do that.
Good answer, Steve. I appreciate the story.
So now that you had a chance to hear what Steve Kerr had to say, I got to say one thing. Those words of wisdom he received was over, 20-something years ago? It's 2023. Although some, mantras and stuff do stay the same over time, like you kind of have to see things from a different perspective. The issue is the young players need to get in. Like you're in a jam-packed West, and the thing that's in the jam-packed West is all young, budding players. So if you run your vets into the ground, by the end of the season, you're not going to have anything left in the tank for the vets. Use those young players, use the young legs, and combat the other young legs what you're playing against in the West. And I think that's the main issue. His philosophy. I'm not, and by no means am I saying Steve Kerr's a bad coach. He's not a bad coach. The resume speaks for itself. They've won 4 championships. They've done some great things with Steve Kerr. But I do think there comes a time in someone's life where they do have to make these prerequisite changes, and they do have to figure out what's the direction they want to go. Because what's that old additive? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. And I understand the fact that these guys have proven themselves, these guys have done certain things, etc. But if you look at the preseason was actually really good. And some people will say, teams don't take the preseason seriously or whatever. But the mixture of players that he played in the preseason, they almost went undefeated in the preseason. And once the regular season started, he started to lean more into the vets. And once he started to lean more into the vets, you started to see the decline and you started to see them waver. So my thing is, and I think all of us are thinking the same thing, get the young guys in here. You drafted a guy who 4 years out of college in Trace David Jackson. He's ready. Get him out there. Let him make his mistakes. They've been able to win. He's been able to stand up to some bigs who've been playing in the NBA for a while. Let the young legs battle the young legs and keep your old vets moving. Yes, you do want to get them going. I understand that. But you also want to give the young guys a role. Because that game where Moses Moody hit, what was it? I think he hit 3 threes in the fourth quarter, 11 points in that fourth quarter alone. You yanked the guy. He's a professional. He's just waiting for his time. He got his shot, and he was the only one giving the Warriors some juice. And Steve Kerr just yanked him out for the vets. Listen, I don't know if they would have won that game. No one really knows. However, you stay with the hot hand. Because if you look across, the coach on the Sacramento Kings, Mike Brown, he stayed with his hot hand. And that guy's not usually in the game that was hot. I forget his name. But he stayed with the hot hand, and they ended up winning that game. Steve Kerr has got to learn how to trust his young players. And like I said, it's a philosophy thing. He's got to make some changes. And he's not changes with the roster, but he's got to make some changes with himself. There's got to be some, real deep inner, work that will allow him to make these changes to get the Warriors to where they need to get. And he needs to start believing in the younger players. Because if you see them play, let's say if you go to a G League, you've got, Brandon Podziemski, Trace David Jackson, and you have Guy Santos, who's, they're on the roster. These guys play decently well together, and they're young. Again, the West is full of young teams that are coming up. Do not run your vets into the ground. There's no need to trade anybody. There's no need to bench anybody or anything like that. Just have a nice mix of the vets and the young players. Let the young players run. Let the young players do what the young players want to do, which is run and gun. And I think that if that happens, you'll see some positive changes with the Warriors. But again, it has to start at the head. It has to start at Steve Kerr. If Mike Dunleavy has to come down to say something to Steve Kerr about it, I think that might have to be done. And I heard another YouTuber, Alchemy, he said heavy is the crown, heavy is the crown that wears it. I forget the specific term he used. But even Steph might have to say something. And granted, it's not about, like I said, benching anybody. It's literally about getting the young players involved, because the West is just a wave of young talent. Matter of fact, the league is just young players coming up. So get the young guys involved, more involved, and stay that way. What I'm really looking for is, now there's Chris Paul who's hurt, and Andrew Wiggins, Thor, something that's, I don't really know what that means. But once these guys get better, I want to see what Steve Kerr's going to do. Now, if he continues to just ride the vets, then it's not going to be a good season for the Warriors. If he kind of starts that intrinsic, that change that he needs to start, which is incorporating the young players a lot more. And no one's saying, oh, build for the future or anything like that. It's just common sense. The league is young. All these guys are coming up. They're budding. They're on their way. Look at Anthony Edwards. All these young players, they're budding. Get your young players in the mix and let them run and gun and have the, like I said this earlier, I didn't say this to anyone. Let the vets take the plane off in this first quarter. Bring the young players in, let them run and gun, bring the plane up to altitude, and once you get to that point where you want to land the plane, you bring the vets in. However, if the vets aren't doing what they have to do, you bring the young players back in, because again, it's a young league and they're coming up. Like, share, subscribe. I appreciate you guys. Thank you very much.